I woke up Tuesday morning to the sound of power tools cutting through the quiet of my neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona, and knew immediately something was wrong. My coffee hadn't even finished brewing when I looked out my kitchen window and saw three men in reflective vests setting up what looked like a wooden structure right on the corner of my property, where my lawn met the sidewalk. I stood there in my pajama pants and Old Navy t-shirt, watching them hammer boards together like they owned the place. I didn't bother putting on real clothes. I just slipped into my work boots and marched outside, the morning sun already promising another scorching day. The thermometer on my porch reads 78 degrees, and it wasn't even 7 in the morning yet. "Hey," I called out as I approached the three workers. "What exactly are you building on my property?" The oldest of the three, a heavy-set guy with a salt and pepper beard, barely looked up from his drill. "HOA information kiosk. Got the work order right here if you need to see it." "HOA information kiosk," I repeated, feeling my blood pressure rising. "On my corner lot." "Says here it's community property," the man replied, pulling a crumpled paper from his back pocket. "Right there on the corner. Perfect spot for neighbors to grab newsletters, check upcoming events, that sort of thing." I snatched the paper from his hand and scanned it quickly. Sure enough, there was an official-looking work order from the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association, signed by President Patricia Hendricks, authorizing the construction of a 4-by-4-foot kiosk structure on the corner of Lot 247, which happened to be my address. "This is insane," I muttered. "This is my property, I have the deed," the worker shrugged. "Look, man, I just build what they tell me to build. You got a problem, take it up with the HOA. We're getting paid either way." I stood there watching them work for another minute, my mind racing through options. I could call the police, but what would I even say? These guys had a work order. I could call my lawyer, but Steve Nichols didn't usually start taking calls until 9, and by then this thing would probably be finished. I pulled out my phone and snapped several photos of the construction, the work order, and the exact location on my property. Walking back inside, I grabbed my phone and dialed Patricia Hendricks directly. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that made my teeth hurt. "Good morning. This is Patricia." "Patricia, this is Stephen Nash from 247 Copper Ridge Drive. There are men building something on my property right now, and apparently you authorized it." "Oh yes, the information kiosk. Isn't it wonderful? The board approved it last month. It's going to be such a great addition to our community." "It's on my property," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level. "My corner lot. My deed clearly shows the property lines, and this structure is well within my boundaries. Actually, Stephen, if you had attended the last board meeting, you would know that corner lots in our community have a special designation. The outer 5 feet of corner properties are considered community easement space for beautification and community projects. It's all in the CCRs. I had read the covenants, conditions, and restrictions when I bought the house 3 years ago. They were 70 pages of mind-numbing legal speak, but I was pretty sure I would have remembered giving up part of my property. "I want to see that in writing," I demanded. "And I want this construction stopped until I can verify it with my lawyer." Patricia's voice lost its sweet tone. "The construction is happening today as scheduled. If you have concerns, you can file a formal complaint with the board, and we'll address it at next month's meeting. Have a wonderful day, Stephen." She hung up before I could respond. I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone, feeling the anger building in my chest. Through the window, I could see the kiosk taking shape. The workers were fast, I had to give them that. The frame was already up and they were attaching the walls. I called Steve Nichols and left a detailed voicemail, then sent him the photos. Then I did what any reasonable person would do in 2025. I went to my computer and started digging through every document I had related to my property. My home office was a converted third bedroom, and I kept all my important documents in a fireproof safe. I pulled out the deed, the title insurance, the survey that was done before I bought the place, and yes, even that massive CCR document. I spread everything across my desk and started reading. The survey was clear. My property line extended right to the sidewalk on both the front and the side street. The corner was definitely mine. I moved to the CCRs, using the search function on my computer after scanning the document. I searched for corner, easement, community property, and half a dozen other terms. Nothing. There was no special provision for corner lots having community easement space. I took screenshots of the relevant pages and emailed them to myself and Steve. Then I went back outside. The kiosk was nearly finished. It was painted in the neighborhood's approved colors, beige and tan, and had a small shingled roof. A corkboard inside was already mounted, and one of the workers was installing a small light fixture. "How much longer?" I asked the bearded worker. "Maybe an hour. Just need to finish the trim and clean up." I nodded and went back inside. I wasn't going to stop them. Not yet. I wanted this thing completely built because what I was planning required it to be finished first. Steve Nichols called me back around 9:30. "Steven, I got your messages and photos. This is pretty clear cut. They're on your property without permission. That's trespassing and the structure is unauthorized. You have every right to remove it. What about their claim about the easement in the CCRs?" "I just read through the sections you sent me and searched the whole document. There's no such provision. They're either lying or confused. Either way, they have no legal right to put that structure there. So if I tear it down, I'm legally protected." There was a pause. "Technically, yes, but Stephen, let me send them a cease and desist first. We can do this the right way." "The right way hasn't worked for me with this HOA, Steve. Last year, they tried to fine me for having my trash cans visible from the street on a Wednesday, even though trash pickup was Thursday morning. The year before that, they said my front door color was too red, even though it's the exact shade listed in their approved color palette. I'm tired of playing their games. I understand your frustration, but think about this carefully. If you remove that structure yourself, they might try to sue you for property damage or destruction of community assets. It's on my property. They built it without my permission. It's not a community asset. It's garbage that someone left on my lawn," Steve sighed. "Okay, document everything. Take photos before, during, and after. Keep all your communications, and Stephen, don't do anything that could be considered dangerous or reckless. Remove it carefully and professionally." We talked for a few more minutes about the specifics, and then I hung up. Through my window, I could see the workers packing up their tools. The kiosk stood there on my corner, looking official and permanent. They had even landscaped around it with some decorative rocks. I watched the work truck pull away, then grabbed my phone and took probably 50 photos of the finished structure from every angle. I measured it with my tape measure and documented that it was a full 6 feet onto my property. I took photos of my property survey markers, which were still visible in the ground, showing the clear boundary lines. Then I went to my garage and looked at my tools. I had a decent collection from years of DIY projects. Hammer, crowbar, reciprocating saw, impact driver, all charged and ready. I loaded everything into a wheelbarrow along with some heavy-duty trash bags and work gloves. It was almost noon, and the temperature had climbed to 95 degrees. I chugged a bottle of water, put on a hat and sunglasses, and wheeled my tools out to the corner. A few neighbors were out and I saw curtains moving in windows. Let them watch. I started with the corkboard inside, unscrewing it carefully and setting it aside. Then I removed the light fixture, disconnecting the wiring. Someone had actually run electricity to this thing, probably tapping into the streetlight circuit. That was definitely illegal. The structure itself was held together with screws and nails, and while it looked fancy, it wasn't particularly sturdy. I used the impact driver to remove all the screws I could access, then used the crowbar to pry apart the boards. The satisfying crack of wood separating filled the air. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" I turned to see a woman marching across the street toward me. She was probably in her mid-50s, with short blonde hair and a visor that said Sunset Ridge HOA on it. I didn't recognize her, but she had that particular energy that told me she was on the board. "I'm removing an unauthorized structure from my property," I said calmly, turning back to my work. "That is community property. You can't just tear it down. It's on my property. I have the survey right here if you want to see it." I gestured to the papers I had clipped to my wheelbarrow. "I'm calling Patricia right now." "And the police." "Feel free," I said, prying another board loose. "I'll be happy to show them my property documents." The woman pulled out her phone and started talking frantically into it. I ignored her and kept working. The walls came down pretty easily, and I stacked the boards neatly in my wheelbarrow. The roof was a bit trickier because it was assembled as one piece, but I managed to detach it and lower it down without breaking anything major. Within 40 minutes, the entire kiosk was disassembled and loaded into my wheelbarrow and 2 large trash bags. I carefully collected every nail, screw, and piece of trim. I even scooped up the decorative rocks and put them in a bucket. When I was finished, the corner of my lot looked exactly like it had that morning before the workers arrived. I wheeled everything into my garage and took more photos documenting the removed structure. Then, I went inside, cranked up the AC, and waited. Patricia Hendricks arrived 20 minutes later in a white Lexus SUV, accompanied by 2 other people who I assumed were board members. I watched through my window as they examined the empty corner, gesturing animatedly. Then Patricia marched up to my front door and rang the bell repeatedly. I took my time answering. When I opened the door, Patricia's face was red and twisted with anger. "Where is the community kiosk?" she demanded. "You mean the unauthorized structure that was built on my property without permission? I removed it. That was HOA property. You had no right." "Actually, Patricia, I had every right. It was built on my private property without my consent. I've consulted with my attorney, and he confirms that I was legally entitled to remove it. You're going to pay for this. The HOA will sue you for the full cost of replacement, plus our legal fees." I pulled out my phone and opened the photos. "Here's my property survey showing the exact boundaries. Here's the section of the CCRs you claimed gave you the right to build on corner lots. Notice there's nothing about easements or community property. Here's the structure built 6 feet onto my property. And here are photos of me removing it from my property." Patricia snatched my phone and scrolled through the photos, her face getting redder. "This doesn't matter. The board approved this project. We allocated budget for it. You've destroyed HOA property." "No, I removed trash from my lawn." "If you want, I can file a police report about the trespassing and illegal construction. I can also report whoever tapped into the electrical line for that light fixture, since that's definitely against code." One of the board members with Patricia, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, put his hand on her arm. "Patricia, maybe we should consult with our attorney before this goes any further." Patricia shook him off. "We're going to emergency session the board tonight. You're going to be fined, and we're going to place a lien on your property if you don't pay." "Looking forward to it," I said. "Make sure your attorney actually reads the CCRs first this time." I closed the door in her face and listened to them argue on my porch for another minute before they left. I felt pretty good about the whole thing, not going to lie, but I knew this was far from over. That evening, I received an email notification about an emergency HOA board meeting scheduled for Thursday night, 2 days away. The agenda item was listed as unauthorized removal of community property by resident. I forwarded it to Steve Nichols with a note asking if he could attend with me. He called me an hour later. "I can be there, but Steven, I want to be prepared for whatever they might throw at us. Can you send me the complete CCRs, all your property documents, and any previous correspondence you've had with the HOA?" I spent the next 2 hours scanning and emailing documents. While I worked, I kept thinking about Patricia's face and her threats. The thing was, this HOA had been a thorn in my side since I moved in. They nitpicked everything. My grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. My mailbox had a tiny rust spot. I planted flowers they said were not on the approved list, even though I couldn't find any such list in the CCRs. Every month there was something new. I had tried to be a good neighbor and a compliant homeowner. I attended a few board meetings, but they were exercises in frustration. Patricia ran them like a dictator, cutting off anyone who disagreed with her. The same 5 people were always on the board because nobody else wanted to deal with the hassle of running against them. And somehow, Patricia had convinced everyone that her interpretation of the rules was the only correct one. Wednesday morning, I woke up to find a formal violation notice tucked into my door. It stated that I had destroyed community property and was being fined $5,000, payable within 30 days, or they would file a lien against my property. The notice also stated that I was required to pay for the reconstruction of the kiosk, estimated at $3,000, $8,000 for removing something they had illegally built on my property. I took a photo of the notice and sent it to Steve immediately. He called me right back. "This is harassment. They have no legal basis for any of this. Don't pay anything. In fact, I think we should file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. They oversee HOAs and can investigate abuses." "Do it," I said. "I'm done playing nice." Wednesday afternoon, I got another surprise. A letter from the HOA's attorney, some firm in Phoenix called Morrison and Associates. It was full of legal language, but the gist was that I had 48 hours to pay for the kiosk replacement, or they would take me to court and seek additional damages. Steve read it over the phone and actually laughed. This attorney clearly didn't do his homework. He's just repeating what the HOA told him without verifying any facts. I'll draft a response. Thursday arrived, and I spent the day preparing for the evening board meeting. Steve had prepared a whole presentation with printed copies of all the relevant documents. He had even found case law from Arizona showing that HOAs could not build on private property without explicit easements or owner permission. The board meeting was held in the clubhouse, a fancy building near the community pool. When I arrived with Steve at 7 that evening, the parking lot was surprisingly full. Apparently, word had spread about the incident, and people wanted to see the drama firsthand. The clubhouse meeting room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of folding chairs for residents. Every seat was taken, and people lined the walls. I recognized most of my neighbors, including the woman with the visor who had confronted me during the demolition. Patricia sat in the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other board members. She had a gavel, which seemed ridiculous for an HOA meeting, and she banged it loudly to call everyone to order. This emergency meeting of the Sunset Ridge HOA board is now in session, she announced. We have one item on tonight's agenda: the unauthorized destruction of community property by resident Stephen Nash of 247 Copper Ridge Drive. She said my name like it tasted bad. I sat in the front row with Steve beside me, his briefcase full of documents on his lap. Mr. Nash, Patricia continued, on Tuesday morning, the HOA completed construction of an information kiosk on community property at the corner of Copper Ridge Drive and Mesa Vista Boulevard. That same day, you took it upon yourself to completely destroy this structure, which cost the HOA nearly $3,000 to build. Point of order, Steve said, standing up. I'm Steve Nichols, Mr. Nash's attorney. Before we continue, I'd like to establish some facts. Can you provide documentation showing that the location where the kiosk was built is actually community property? Patricia's jaw tightened. It's on a corner lot. Corner lots have easements for community beautification. Can you cite the specific section of the CCRs that establishes this easement? Patricia shuffled through some papers in front of her. It's common knowledge. It's been policy for years. Common knowledge isn't a legal document, Steve said pleasantly. I have here a complete copy of the Sunset Ridge CCRs, which I've read in their entirety. There is no mention of any easement on corner lots. I also have Mr. Nash's property survey, conducted by a licensed surveyor, showing his property boundaries. The kiosk was built 6 feet onto his private property. Steve walked up and placed copies of the documents on the board table. The other board members started looking through them, and I could see confusion on their faces. Furthermore, Steve continued, the HOA built this structure without obtaining Mr. Nash's permission, without filing for any necessary permits, and without establishing any legal right to use his property. Under Arizona law, that's trespassing and illegal construction. Mr. Nash had every legal right to remove the structure from his property. This is ridiculous, Patricia snapped. The board approved this project in good faith. We were improving the community. Improving the community is admirable, Steve said. But you can't do it on someone's private property without permission. That's basic property law. One of the other board members, a woman in her 60s with gray hair, raised her hand tentatively. Patricia, did we verify the property lines before approving the kiosk location? Of course we did. Patricia said, but her voice wavered slightly. The community manager said it was fine. Who is your community manager? Steve asked. Karen Whitmore with Prestige Property Management. I almost laughed. Of course the community manager was named Karen. And did Miss Whitmore provide any documentation supporting the claim that the HOA could build on Mr. Nash's property? Patricia didn't answer. She just glared at Steve and me. Another board member, the thin man with glasses who had tried to calm Patricia down at my house, cleared his throat. I think we need to table this until we can consult with our attorney and verify the property line issue. I disagree, Patricia said. Mr. Nash destroyed HOA property. He needs to pay for it. It wasn't HOA property, Steve said firmly. It was an unauthorized structure on private property. And speaking of payments, Mr. Nash has been issued a violation fine of $5,000 and a demand for $3,000 in reconstruction costs. We will not be paying any of these amounts. In fact, if the HOA continues with this harassment, we'll be filing a formal complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate and pursuing our own legal action for trespassing, harassment, and abuse of authority. The room had gone completely silent. I could feel dozens of eyes on me and Steve. Then someone in the back started clapping. Then someone else. Within seconds, half the room was applauding, Patricia's face turned purple. She banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order, order, this meeting is not a circus," but the damage was done. I could see several board members looking uncomfortable, and the crowd was clearly on my side. Steve had made his point perfectly. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Patricia tried to maintain control, but people kept shouting questions and comments. Finally, the board voted to table the issue until they could consult with their attorney, with Patricia casting the only dissenting vote. As Steve and I left the clubhouse, several neighbors stopped me to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to the board. An elderly man named Frank, who lived 3 houses down from me, said, "That woman has been running this place like her personal kingdom for 5 years. It's about time someone pushed back." I drove home feeling vindicated, but also knowing this wasn't over. Patricia Hendricks didn't strike me as the type to admit defeat easily. I was right. Friday morning, I found my mailbox had been spray painted with the words "Rule Breaker" in red paint. I took photos and filed a police report for vandalism. The officer who responded was sympathetic and said there had been several similar incidents in HOA neighborhoods around Scottsdale. "People take this stuff way too seriously," he said, writing up the report. "It's just a neighborhood association, not a government." I also noticed that someone had filed a complaint with the city about my property. A code enforcement officer showed up Friday afternoon to inspect for violations. He walked around my property with a clipboard, checked everything thoroughly, and then gave me a clean bill of health. "Everything looks good here," he said. "Whoever filed this complaint said you had junk cars and overgrown landscaping, but that's clearly not true. Some people just abuse the system." I thanked him and added his report to my growing file of documents. Steve had advised me to document everything, and I was building quite a collection. The following Tuesday, Steve received a letter from the HOA's attorney, Morrison and Associates. This letter was very different in tone from the first one. It acknowledged that there might have been a misunderstanding about the property lines and suggested mediation to resolve the dispute. "They know they screwed up," Steve told me over the phone. "Their attorney probably actually looked at the documents this time and realized the HOA has no case. They're trying to find a graceful way out. What do you think I should do?" "That depends on what you want. Do you want to push for damages? Do you just want to be left alone? Do you want an apology?" I thought about it for a while. "I want them to acknowledge they were wrong in writing. I want the fines and fees removed, and I want assurance that they won't pull something like this again." Steve worked out an agreement over the next week. The HOA would issue a formal apology, remove all fines and fees, and acknowledge that I had been within my legal rights to remove the structure. In exchange, I wouldn't file complaints with the state or pursue legal action for the harassment. I agreed to the terms, and everything was formalized in a settlement agreement. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the settlement, I came home from work to find another structure on my corner lot. This time, it was a little free library, one of those decorative wooden boxes on a post where people can take and leave books. It was actually kind of cute, painted in bright colors with a weatherproof door, but it was still on my property without my permission. I took photos and called Steve immediately. They did it again. Different structure, same location. Steve sighed heavily. "You're kidding me." After everything we just went through, I'm looking at it right now. Okay, same drill as before. Document everything, verify it's on your property, and remove it. But Stephen, this time I think we need to push harder. This is clearly intentional harassment. I removed the little library that same evening, carefully disassembling it and storing it in my garage next to the kiosk pieces. Then I did something I had been thinking about for a while. I decided to personally deliver all of this stuff to Patricia Hendricks. I looked up her address in the HOA directory. She lived in one of the larger houses in the neighborhood, about a mile from me. Saturday morning, I loaded all the pieces of the kiosk and the little library into my pickup truck. It took 3 trips to get everything loaded. Then I drove to Patricia's house. It was 8 in the morning, early enough that she would probably be home but late enough to be reasonable. Her house was a sprawling Spanish-style place with a 3-car garage and elaborate desert landscaping. A white Lexus and a black Mercedes were parked in the driveway. I backed my truck up to her driveway and started unloading. I stacked all the kiosk boards neatly on her driveway, right in front of her garage doors. Then I placed the little library structure on top of the pile. I added the bucket of decorative rocks, the corkboard, the light fixture, and every single nail and screw I had collected. When I was finished, there was a substantial pile of wood and materials blocking both garage doors. I took photos of the whole thing, then walked up to her front door and rang the bell. I could hear movement inside, and after a minute, Patricia opened the door in a bathrobe, looking annoyed. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Returning your property," I said. "You keep leaving stuff on my lawn, so I figured you must want it at your house instead. Now it's at your house." She looked past me and saw the pile in her driveway. Her mouth fell open. "You can't do this." "Actually, I can. It's your stuff, and now it's on your property." "Have a great day, Patricia." I walked back to my truck and drove away, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Through my rearview mirror, I could see Patricia in her bathrobe, standing in her driveway, staring at the pile of wood. I got home and immediately called Steve to tell him what I had done. He was quiet for a long moment. "Steven, that was probably not the smartest move legally speaking." "I didn't damage anything. I didn't trespass. I just returned property that she had caused to be placed on my land." "I know, but it's provocative. She's going to escalate. Let her." "I'm tired of this game. She needs to understand that I'm not going away and I'm not backing down." Steve sighed. "Okay, but from here on out, let me handle all communication with her and the HOA. No more solo operations." I agreed, though I didn't regret what I had done. Sometimes you have to make a statement. Patricia tried to get the police to charge me with illegal dumping, but they refused after I showed them all my documentation and explained the situation. The officer who responded actually seemed amused by the whole thing. "Sir, I can't blame you for being frustrated," he told me. "But maybe try to use the proper channels from now on, okay?" The HOA held another emergency board meeting, but this time Steve advised me not to attend. Instead, he went alone and presented a detailed timeline of events, along with documentation of the repeated harassment. He also brought up the vandalism of my mailbox and the false code enforcement complaint. According to Steve, several board members were clearly uncomfortable with how things had been handled. The man with the glasses, whose name was Robert, actually spoke up and said the board needed to stop targeting me and focus on running the community properly. But Patricia wouldn't let it go. She pushed for more violations, more fines, and more restrictions. She was obsessed with making me pay for humiliating her. That's when things took an interesting turn. One of my neighbors, a woman named Sandra Miller who had been at the first board meeting, called me with some information. "Steven, I think you need to know something," she said. "I'm on the Architectural Review Committee and I've been noticing some things that don't add up. Patricia has been approving payments to vendors without proper documentation. I started digging, and I think she might be embezzling HOA funds." This was serious. What kind of amounts are we talking about? I'm not sure yet, but I've found at least 20,000 in questionable payments over the last year. Things like landscaping services that were never performed, repairs that were never done, consulting fees to companies that don't seem to exist. You need to take this to the full board, I said. I tried. Patricia shut me down and said I was overstepping my authority. But Stephen, as a homeowner, you have the right to review the HOA's financial records. If you request them formally, they have to provide them. I called Steve immediately and told him what Sandra had shared. He drafted a formal request for all financial records, board meeting minutes, and vendor contracts for the past 3 years. We sent it certified mail to the HOA's management company and to the board. The HOA had 30 days to respond under Arizona law. They dragged it out to the last possible day, but finally, I received a massive box of documents. Steve and I, along with Sandra, spent an entire weekend going through everything. What we found was worse than Sandra suspected. Patricia had been systematically billing the HOA for fake services and pocketing the money. She had created several shell companies with names that sounded legitimate, things like Desert Property Solutions and Scottsdale Community Services. These companies existed only on paper. The bank accounts for these companies led back to Patricia. Over 3 years, she had stolen nearly $60,000 from the HOA. Steve contacted a forensic accountant who specialized in HOA fraud. The accountant confirmed our findings and prepared a detailed report. Then Steve did something I hadn't expected. He contacted the FBI. "This is mail fraud and wire fraud," Steve explained. "She used the Postal Service and electronic transfers to conduct this scheme. That makes it a federal crime." I wasn't sure how I felt about this. Part of me just wanted Patricia to leave me alone. But another part of me knew that what she had done was serious, and that other people in the community had been victimized by her theft. The FBI took the case seriously. 2 agents came to interview me, Steve and Sandra. They also interviewed other board members and started subpoenaing bank records. Within a month, they had built a solid case. In early March, Patricia Hendricks was arrested at her home on federal fraud charges. The Scottsdale police also charged her with vandalism after they found evidence on her phone that she had been the one who spray-painted my mailbox. Apparently, she had texted a friend about it, thinking she was being clever. The arrest made the local news. It turned out Patricia had pulled similar schemes at 2 previous HOAs before moving to Sunset Ridge. She had a pattern of getting elected to board positions, establishing control, and then slowly stealing money while hiding behind a facade of strict rule enforcement. The HOA board held an emergency election to replace Patricia and the 2 other board members who had been complicit in her schemes. Robert, the man with glasses who had been the voice of reason, became the new president. Sandra joined the board as treasurer. One of Robert's first acts as president was to issue a formal apology to me on behalf of the HOA. He also announced that the board would be implementing new financial controls and transparency measures to prevent future fraud. "We lost sight of what an HOA is supposed to be," Robert said at a community meeting in April. "We're supposed to maintain property values and create a nice place to live, not harass homeowners and waste money on pet projects. That's going to change." Patricia's case wound its way through the federal court system. Steve kept me updated on the proceedings. She tried to fight the charges at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. In June, she pleaded guilty to mail fraud, wire fraud, and theft. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay back all the money she had stolen, plus fines and penalties. The vandalism charge from the state was folded into her sentence. She would serve it concurrently with the federal time. I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom. When the judge asked if anyone wanted to make a victim impact statement, I stood up and walked to the front. Your Honor, Patricia Hendricks made my life miserable for years. She nitpicked every detail of my property, threatened me with fines, and built structures on my land without permission. At the time, I thought she was just a control freak who took her position too seriously. Now I understand she was creating chaos to distract from her crimes. She abused the trust of an entire community for personal gain. I hope this sentence sends a message that HOA boards are not above the law. The judge nodded. Thank you, Mr. Nash. Your persistence in fighting back against the harassment actually helped uncover a much larger crime. The court appreciates your cooperation with the investigation. After the sentencing, several reporters wanted to talk to me. I gave a brief statement about the importance of HOA transparency and homeowner rights, then went home. I was done with drama. Life in Sunset Ridge improved dramatically after Patricia's arrest. The new board focused on actual community issues rather than petty violations. They organized neighborhood events that people actually wanted to attend. They negotiated better contracts with service providers and actually saved money while improving services. And most importantly, they left homeowners alone unless there was a genuine problem. I never rebuilt the kiosk or the little library on my corner lot. Instead, I planted some native desert plants and installed a small bench. I offered the bench to the HOA as a community amenity, but on the condition that it remained on my property and I could remove it if I ever wanted to. Robert agreed immediately, and the bench became a popular spot for neighbors to sit and chat during evening walks. The pieces of the kiosk and little library that I had delivered to Patricia's driveway ended up being donated to a local charity that built playhouses for underprivileged kids. At least something good came out of them. Steve Nichols became something of a local celebrity among HOA attorneys. He started getting calls from homeowners all over Arizona dealing with similar issues. He even gave a presentation at a state real estate conference about HOA abuse and homeowner rights. Sandra Miller and I became friends through the whole ordeal. She invited me to a few board meetings in my capacity as a concerned homeowner, and I actually found them productive and reasonable. It was strange to attend an HOA meeting and not feel like I was walking into a trap. One evening in July, I was sitting on my corner bench watching the sunset paint the McDowell Mountains in shades of orange and purple. Robert walked by with his dog and stopped to chat. "You know, Stephen, I wanted to thank you," he said. "If you hadn't fought back against Patricia, we might never have discovered what she was doing. She stole from all of us, but you're the one who stood up to her." "I just didn't want a kiosk on my lawn," I said with a smile. Robert laughed. "Well, your stubbornness saved the community about $60,000 and got rid of a criminal. I'd say that's a pretty good outcome." After he left, I sat there thinking about the whole crazy journey. It had started with me waking up to the sound of power tools and getting angry about an ugly wooden structure. It had led to confrontations, legal battles, dramatic deliveries of scrap wood, and ultimately, a federal investigation. The thing about HOAs is that they're supposed to protect property values and create community standards. When they work right, they can be genuinely helpful. But when they're run by people who abuse their power, they become instruments of harassment and control. Patricia had turned our HOA into her personal fiefdom, and nobody had challenged her until I refused to accept her authority over my own property. I wasn't a hero. I was just a guy who got mad about something being built on his lawn and decided to do something about it. But sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes one person standing up and saying no is enough to start a chain reaction that changes everything. My corner lot remained kiosk-free. My grass stayed whatever height I wanted it to be within reason. My mailbox got repainted, this time in a color I actually liked, and I never had to deal with Patricia Hendricks again. The federal prison where she was serving her sentence was somewhere in Nevada. I didn't think about her much. But occasionally, when I walked past that corner where the kiosk had briefly stood, I remembered the satisfaction of tearing it down board by board. I remembered loading all those scraps into my truck and driving them to her driveway. I remembered her face when she opened her door that morning and saw what I had done. Some people might say I should have been more diplomatic, more willing to compromise, more respectful of the HOA's authority. Those people had never dealt with Patricia Hendricks. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you have to make a dramatic gesture to get people's attention. And sometimes you have to tear down an illegal structure on your property and deliver the pieces to the person responsible, just to make a point. The neighborhood kids sometimes asked me about the bench on my corner. I told them it used to be something else, something that didn't belong there, but now it was a place for people to rest and enjoy the view. That seemed to satisfy them. I thought about putting up a little plaque on the bench, something witty about property rights or HOA overreach. But in the end, I decided to keep it simple. The bench was just a bench. The corner was just a corner. And I was just a homeowner who had stood up for his rights and accidentally uncovered a major crime in the process. Steve Nichols still called me occasionally with updates about other HOA cases he was working on. Apparently, my story had inspired several other homeowners to push back against unreasonable boards. A few had even used the same tactic of carefully documenting everything and refusing to back down. "You started a movement," Steve joked during one call. "I just wanted to be left alone," I replied. "Well, you got your wish, and you made it possible for a lot of other people to be left alone too." I suppose that was true. The new board at Sunset Ridge was focused on actual community improvement rather than nitpicking and power games. They held quarterly town halls where homeowners could voice concerns. They published detailed financial reports every month. They even created a suggestion box for community improvement projects, and they actually considered the suggestions instead of just doing whatever the president wanted. It was remarkable how much better things got once Patricia was gone. It made me wonder how many other HOAs were being run by similar tyrants, and how many homeowners were suffering in silence because they didn't know they had rights or didn't want to cause trouble. I wasn't a troublemaker by nature. I had spent most of my life following rules and avoiding conflict. But something about that kiosk, about waking up to find construction happening on my property without my knowledge or consent, had triggered something in me. It was a violation, plain and simple. And I couldn't let it stand. Looking back, I could have handled some things differently. I probably shouldn't have delivered all that wood to Patricia's driveway, even though it felt amazing at the time. I could have been more patient with the legal process, instead of taking matters into my own hands. But I also knew that if I had just rolled over and accepted the kiosk, if I had paid the fines and fees and let Patricia bully me, nothing would have changed. She would have continued stealing, and the HOA would have continued harassing homeowners. Sometimes being unreasonable is the most reasonable thing you can do. The summer heat intensified through July and August, with temperatures regularly hitting 110 degrees. I spent a lot of time in my air-conditioned house, but I still made a point of walking around the neighborhood in the evenings when it cooled down to a merely sweltering 95 degrees. The community looked better than it had in years. The new board had negotiated a better landscaping contract, and the common areas were properly maintained. They had repainted the clubhouse and fixed the pool equipment that had been broken for months. They had even installed better lighting on some of the walking paths, which several residents had been requesting for years. All of this was possible because the board was actually using HOA funds for community benefit instead of siphoning money into Patricia's fake companies. It was amazing what could be accomplished with honest leadership. In September, the HOA held its annual meeting and election. Robert ran for president again and won easily. Sandra remained as treasurer. 3 new board members were elected, all of them focused on transparency and reasonable governance. During the meeting, Robert gave a presentation about the changes implemented over the past 6 months and the plans for the coming year. "We're here to serve the community, not rule over it," Robert said. "That's been our guiding principle, and it will continue to be. We want Sunset Ridge to be a great place to live, where people feel comfortable in their homes and proud of their neighborhood." People applauded. It was a stark contrast to the meetings during Patricia's reign, where people sat in uncomfortable silence or argued bitterly about petty issues. I stood up during the question period. "I just want to say thank you to Robert and the new board. You've done an incredible job of turning things around. This feels like a real community now, not a police state." More applause. Several people came up to me after the meeting to thank me again for standing up to Patricia. It was still a bit surreal to be treated like some kind of neighborhood hero when all I had done was tear down a kiosk and hire a good lawyer. As fall arrived, and the temperatures finally dropped back below 100 degrees, I started thinking about the future. I had been so focused on fighting the HOA for so long that I hadn't really thought about what came next. My house was paid off. My job as a software engineer was stable and remote, which meant I had flexibility. I had no major obligations or pressing concerns. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely at peace in my own home. I wasn't worried about violation notices or surprise construction projects. I wasn't constantly on edge, waiting for the next confrontation with Patricia. I could just live my life. I planted more native plants in my yard, creating a low-maintenance desert garden that looked beautiful and conserved water. I installed solar panels on my roof, something Patricia had tried to block for years by claiming they weren't aesthetically pleasing. The new board approved my installation in 3 days. I even joined the architectural review committee, the same one Sandra was on. I figured if I was going to be part of the community, I might as well help make decisions instead of just complaining about them. The committee met once a month to review requests for exterior modifications, and we actually tried to be reasonable and helpful rather than looking for reasons to deny things. My first meeting on the committee was eye-opening. I saw requests for things like adding a covered patio, changing house paint colors, installing new garage doors, and building a pergola. Every single request was reasonable and well-planned. We approved all of them with minor suggestions. "Is it always this easy?" I asked Sandra afterward. She laughed. "It is now. When Patricia was in charge, she would find reasons to deny or delay everything. She seemed to enjoy making people jump through hoops. Now we just ask ourselves if the change is reasonable and if it maintains community standards. If the answer is yes, we approve it." It's not complicated. Life continued peacefully through the rest of 2026 and into the next year. Patricia remained in federal prison. I heard through Steve that she had tried to appeal her sentence, but the appeal was denied. She would serve her full 3 years. The HOA funds she had stolen were slowly being recovered through the restitution process, though it would take years to get everything back. The new board had built up a healthy reserve fund through careful budgeting, and by eliminating the wasteful spending that had occurred under Patricia's leadership. I occasionally thought about that Tuesday morning when I woke up to construction noise and saw the kiosk being built. It felt like a lifetime ago, even though it had only been about a year and a half. That one incident had changed everything. It had exposed corruption, led to a federal prosecution, reformed an entire HOA board, and somehow turned me into a minor local celebrity. All because I refused to let someone build something on my lawn without permission. The bench on my corner lot became a neighborhood fixture. People stopped there regularly to rest during walks or to chat with neighbors. Kids used it as a gathering spot. On Halloween, I put out a bowl of candy there for trick-or-treaters. At Christmas, I decorated it with lights. It was a much better use of that space than a kiosk nobody wanted or a little library that wasn't really needed. It was simple, functional, and actually served the community. One evening in late spring, almost exactly 2 years after the original kiosk incident, I was sitting on the bench watching another spectacular Arizona sunset when a car pulled up. A woman got out and walked over to me. "Are you Stephen Nash?" she asked. "That's me," I said, a bit warily. I had learned to be cautious about strangers approaching me, especially after all the drama. "My name is Jennifer Parker. I'm a reporter with Arizona HOA magazine. I'm writing a feature article about HOA reform and homeowner rights, and your case came up repeatedly in my research. Would you be willing to talk to me?" I hesitated. I had avoided most media attention after Patricia's sentencing. But Arizona HOA magazine was a legitimate publication that focused on governance issues and homeowner education. Maybe my story could help other people. "Sure," I said. "What do you want to know?" We talked for over an hour. I told her the whole story from beginning to end. The kiosk, the confrontations, the legal battles, the discovery of fraud, the arrest and conviction. She took notes and asked intelligent questions. "What would you say to other homeowners dealing with similar situations?" she asked finally. I thought about it carefully. "Document everything. Know your rights. Read your CCRs and your state laws. Don't be afraid to push back when the HOA is wrong. And if you suspect financial impropriety, investigate it. HOA boards have a fiduciary duty to the community, and if they're not meeting that duty, they need to be held accountable. You regret how you handled things. The dramatic delivery to Patricia's house, for example," I smiled. "Honestly, no. It probably wasn't the most mature thing to do, but it sent a message. Sometimes you have to make a statement to get people's attention. And let's be real, it was pretty satisfying." Jennifer laughed. "I bet it was. Thank you for your time, Stephen. I think this is going to be a great article." The article came out a month later. It was a detailed account of the whole situation, with sidebars about homeowner rights, HOA financial oversight, and warning signs of board corruption. My quote about delivering the scraps to Patricia's house was highlighted in a call-out box. Steve called me after the article was published. "You're famous now. I've gotten 3 calls already from people who read the article and want to hire me for their own HOA disputes." "Happy to help drum up business," I said, "as long as I don't have to deal with any more kiosks." "I think you're safe on that front. Word has gotten around. I doubt any HOA in Arizona is going to try building on your property anytime soon." He was right about that. My corner lot remained blissfully free of unauthorized structures. The bench stayed right where it was, serving as a quiet reminder that sometimes standing up for yourself leads to bigger changes than you ever expected. I learned a lot from the experience. I learned that HOA boards are not all powerful, despite what they might claim. I learned that documentation and persistence can overcome bureaucratic bullying. I learned that most people are reasonable and just want to live in peace, and it's usually just one or two bad actors who create chaos. Most importantly, I learned that it's okay to say no. It's okay to fight back when someone violates your rights. It's okay to make a scene if that's what it takes to protect yourself and your property. The kiosk incident became part of neighborhood lore. New residents would hear the story from longtime neighbors and would often come by to introduce themselves and see the famous corner lot where it all started. I always welcomed them and told them the story if they asked. "So where are the pieces of the kiosk now?" they would inevitably ask. "Long gone, donated to charity, but the memory lives on," and it did. That memory and the changes it sparked continued to shape Sunset Ridge for the better. The HOA board remained transparent and accountable. Homeowners felt empowered to speak up about concerns without fear of retaliation. The community thrived. As for me, I went back to living my quiet life as a software engineer in suburban Arizona. I worked on my projects, tended my desert garden, and enjoyed the beautiful weather most of the year. But I stayed involved with the HOA, serving on the Architectural Review Committee and attending board meetings when I could. I never forgot what had happened, and I never took my property rights for granted again. That corner lot, with its simple bench and native plants, represented something important to me. It represented the principle that your home is your castle, and nobody has the right to violate that without your consent, not even the HOA. Years would pass, and eventually, the whole incident would fade from immediate memory. But the changes it sparked would remain. Sunset Ridge would be a better community because someone decided to tear down a kiosk and deliver the pieces to an HOA president's driveway. It wasn't the most conventional approach to neighborhood governance, but it worked, and really, that's all that mattered. I sat on my bench that evening, watching the last light fade from the desert sky, and felt deeply content. My corner lot was mine, my house was mine, my rights were protected. And my community was finally the kind of place I wanted to live. All because I refused to let anyone build on my property without permission. Sometimes the simplest principles are worth fighting for.